Assalamu alaikum Chem 30s and welcome back to organic chemistry. What we're going to do now is get a little bit more specific. Carbon can attach itself in many ways, but it could also have many things attached to it because it has 4 electron domains. And what that really means is that it could make up to 4 bonds, each with its electrons equally spread out around the center atom, which makes it very versatile in bonding. And so many things can bond to carbon and still possess all the same organic qualities. So when something bonds to the carbon, that becomes the center, right, or the determinant of what that compound can do and what it can behave like. And so that portion that bonds with the carbon is called a functional group. And depending on what is being bonded to that carbon and how it's being bonded to that carbon can determine whether the organic compound will act like an acid, an alcohol, a carbonyl group, right, like a ketone for the biologists out there, or something useful that, like an ester that could be sweet and sour at the same time or make perfumes, etc. So the way things bond to carbons, or the functional group that the carbon has, really gives all of its properties and its qualities as an organic molecule. The first main and possibly the most common functional group that we're going to work with, and that you would see almost everywhere, especially the pharmacy, would be the alcohols. Now they're a sub-functional group from the main functional group of the hydroxyls, but an alcohol has a carbon, at least one of the carbons in a parent molecule that has a hydroxyl group or an OH bonded directly to it. Now, because it doesn't actually accept a hydrogen, used all these chemicals, it is not basic. In fact, I know a lot of these functional groups to think that anything seen what they can do would act like a strong base, but remember, one thing I've never seen only takes place. I ain't ever seen two pretty best friends. One of them's always got to be hydrogen, which when it attaches itself to a carbon, it does not. So it is an alcohol, and alcohols have many different uses, mostly antiseptics. But they are a key reactant in many plastics as well, and we'll see that later on with polymers. The other carbon functional groups that we're going to normally see that are also quite common are the carboxylic acids. And the word acid really gives a hint to all of its properties. It'll turn red litmus red. It'll turn blue litmus red. It'll have a pH that is lower than 7. It'll neutralize most bases. And as well, a lot of them are corrosive, but in higher concentrations. And just like alcohols, it is also a main reactant in the manufacturing of plastics. Now, the way to distinguish an alcohol from a carboxylic acid is really in the fine details. An alcohol has simply one hydroxyl bonded to a carbon, and that could be any carbon inside the parent chain. While a carboxylic acid has a hydroxyl, and then on the same carbon, a double bond to an oxygen. And a carboxylic acid is from the functional group, it's a subclass of the functional group carboxyls. And so just to summarize, carboxylic acids have a hydroxyl group and the double bond to an oxygen or the carboxyl end, while alcohols just have a hydroxyl bonded to the carbon. Another functional group that we've already seen are the halides, and that's simply when you have an organic compound and a halide, one of the halogens, be it fluorine, chlorine, bromine, iodine, are all attached as ions onto one of the carbons in the parent chain. We have what we call an organic halide. The properties of these organic halides will vary depending on the type of halide that is bonded to the carbon. The last type of functional group that you have to worry about in Chem 30, now these are not the only functional groups, right? It's just we only talk about 4 in Chem 30. The last one that we're more or less concerned with would be our esters. And esters are super useful for producing, a lot of times, candy, artificial flavors, perfumes, plastics. They're probably one of the most used in industry amongst all the organic compounds. And so you would probably have come across them as flavoring agents for a lot of the sugars and candies that we eat. Now, this one, your ester, is a combination between an alcohol and a carboxylic acid. And so what you end up getting as an identifier, a key identifier of an ester in an organic compound, is a carbon with a double bond to an oxygen, and then on the same carbon, a single bond to another oxygen. So it has two different bonds to two different oxygens. One of the oxygens is double bonded to it, and the other oxygen is single bonded to it. But then, when we look on the other side, there's another continued carbon chain. So when we're trying to distinguish between alcohols, carboxylic acids, and esters, it's really in the fine details. Alcohols have just hydroxyls, or the OH. Carboxylic acids have a double bond to an oxygen, while the same carbon is bonded to an OH. And then esters have a double bond to an oxygen on one end of the carbon, and on the same carbon, another oxygen single bonded to it. Now, I've worked with and seen and used all these chemicals in the lab. In fact, I've used more than these functional groups. So I've seen what they can do. But one thing I've never seen, I ain't ever seen two pretty best friends. One of them's always got to be ugly.